Hey, I don't know if you know, but Warrior Women just launched an entirely new lifestyle brand collection on Warrior Women Business Shop. And today we're giving 10% to anything you purchase on the shop with the code Warrior Women 10. Also, this month, Women's History Month, we're donating a portion of all sales on our shop to women in disabilities. So please, we encourage you to purchase and give today. So, welcome everyone to Warrior Women in Business episode number 37. And a happy kickstart to Women's History Month. We have so much to cover today, so much to cover. So first I want to say thank you to Betty Ng, who has graced me with her presence today. So thank you for being our guest today, Betty. We have a lot to cover today, so.
Yes, I am so excited to be here with you, Jasmine. Excited for our discussion.
Yeah, wonderful. So welcome everyone that's on Zoom. Just a quick note for folks that are on Zoom or will be joining Zoom. You will have the ability to use the chat to ask any questions. And then at the end, we'll be covering those questions. This podcast will run about 30 to 45 minutes. It's meant to be very conversational. So I'd like to start with just introducing Warrior Women in Business and myself for those of you that are new to Warrior Women in Business. Warrior Women in Business, if you don't know who we are a media company, a marketing agency, and a lifestyle brand that started in about 2017, 2018. I kind of hesitate because we actually started as Wonder Woman in Business. And then we got some attention from Warner Brothers and quickly changed our name, which is actually, I think, an awesome story. And the whole reason I actually started Warrior Women in Business from JS Media is because I was speaking at a conference. I don't know if Betty, if you know the Women's Leadership Exchange run by Andrea March. She's an amazing person. I was speaking at that conference and I realized that there's a lot of women that are hungry and need real support and don't need it in a kind of like topical way. They need it in a substantial, realistic way. And for anyone that knows me as a personal branding coach and advisor, I'm all about being unapologetically real. And so Warrior Women in Business was started really as a podcast. What I wanted to do is I was serving a lot of awesome female executives. And I said, I want the world to see these women, and I want these women to be able to share their stories and connect at a high level, but also at the same time, educate and support female entrepreneurs that are coming up. So that's where it came from. It's grown into an event series, a conference called Brand You, and a lifestyle brand, which I'm actually very, very proud of, because the lifestyle piece of it is really about the woman who is just super busy and has a lot going on and has to constantly perform, whether that means, because I have guests from the entertainment industry as well, so whether that's in the office workspace, on the stage, or just building her business, we all have a lot going on. And how do we do that seamlessly and authentically? Well, we need to really, truly support and help each other. I just want to give a quick note before I jump into the podcast. This podcast is so overdue. This episode 36, was the last time that I was able to do the Warrior Women in Business podcast in Los Angeles with Jeanine Diardio, the CMO of Guitar Center Live, because afterwards I got into an accident and I've literally been out of commission. So I am so happy to be doing this podcast today and have the ability to actually, I lost my vision for a long time, see Betty and do this. And I really thank anybody that's kind of stuck with us during this time. So that being said, I want to jump right into the podcast. Again, there's opportunity to ask questions for those of you that are on Zoom. And if you're live streaming this, please do enjoy this and we'll be doing a replay. So initially I always do like a little short bio and then I ask my guests to add on to that. So Betty and I'll just tell you guys how we met because I think that's important. Betty stood out to me big time. And I don't know, Betty, what year was that? Do you remember?
I think it was like 2017, maybe?
Yeah, that was a good year. Pre-COVID, we were sitting in a very crowded room of authors. And I was actually there representing one of my author female executive clients who's an awesome person. And we were sitting around, it was like an author kind of round table, right? And there was a gentleman we were kind of all working with who has a great publishing company. And Betty was telling her story, I remember, about your book and the work you were doing with your mom, I think, right? And I was kind of blown away. I was like, I don't know, you were like this breath of fresh air, but also like driven. And that was kind of my like little takeaway. And then you kind of stuck in my mind, and I always, as a LinkedIn trainer, I always connect with everybody on LinkedIn. So I was thinking I'm going to restart my podcast, like thank God. And usually Warrior Women is very, very, very busy on this month, Women's History Month. So I'm thinking like, okay, now I finally am going to do the podcast again. I need to get my schedule going. How am I going to kickstart this thing? And last year I was the president of NABO. And I was like, Betty Ing, what is she doing? So I sent her a note, right? Like out of the blue. And I was like, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? She's like, sure. So that was kind of it. And I got to be honest with you, because that's what Warrior Women in Business is all about. I didn't really know too much more than I thought she was great and a little bit about her book. So, now I've learned that she seems to be a real champion for inclusion, and it's such an important topic. And companies, continually try to embrace it, especially like if we look at this month of celebration of women. Okay, so as I was saying, yeah, so Betty had, she's really this champion for inclusion, and this month is so important. So I wanted to give a little short bio and then jump into questions that I know that we really want to get answered for those of us that are very interested in embracing inclusion. And I think when I was reading about what your company, Inspiring Diversity, does, what interests me is how inclusion can be used in organizations, whether they are small or large, to drive productivity and profitability. So with that being said, my short bio of Betty. Okay, so as I mentioned, she's an author and she's going to talk about that. But she, her company, Inspiring Diversity, is really about fostering a culture of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I know you're going to talk about that today. She's a #1 best-selling author and co-authored Polling Power, right? That's how we say it?
Yes. Polling Power.
Polling Power, which I'm really excited. Thank you for throwing that up. I'm excited to read it. I haven't had a chance to read it. So Betty, you better sign one because I want to read it.
Yes.
Honestly. So I have this whole thing of books I want to read. Propelling Yourself and Others to Success. You're a perfect warrior woman. Because that's what this is all about. With her mother, Polling. Right, okay. And she and her children, which is really interesting, have also launched the best-selling and award-winning this is all P's, right, Betty, today?
Yes, it's all P's. My favorite letter.
It's all about the P. It's all about the consonants. Persevering Penguins and Pals children's book series, which is really cool. Because we can't start too young, right? In being empowered, being successful, and having confidence. God, it's so important. Okay. Betty has contributed to Thrive Global and has appeared in top-tier publications, including Forbes. We have the connection of Forbes, so I've seen your work. Bustle, Ladders, and Fairy God Boss. Ooh, I love Fairy God Boss. I remember them. She has also been featured on Fox 5, Good Day Street Talk. I watched that. And Pix 11 News. She has 20 years of corporate development experience in the finance industry, including at large organizations such as Moody's. She has correct me if I'm wrong, you have your BA from Harvard and your master's from Stanford?
Actually, the other way around.
Okay, sorry, people. I apologize.
No worries.
Either way, it's so impressive. So whatever way you slice those two of the best schools in America. And I'm so happy that she mentioned to me that today we're also going to be talking about pickleball because it's such a good thing. Okay, so, all right. So let me just jump right in. Did I miss anything? That's first and foremost.
I think that's good to start, and we'll talk a little bit more about me and my background as we go along.
All right, good. So #1 question is kind of obvious because people throw around like, especially, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you and why?
Okay, so well, let's just start off with diversity. So diversity is where multiple identities are represented. And oftentimes when people think of diversity, they really think of the obvious things, what we call internal diversity, which is about race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, and also physical, mental abilities. There are many, many more layers and dimensions of diversity that people don't think about oftentimes. It also includes personality, it includes socioeconomic status, education, experiences, religion, and beliefs. Also, things such as organizational status, your role, your function, and even the era in which you grew up and the things that influence you, like historical events, world events, and other things. And so, and all of these different dimensions of diversity really impact your perspective, right?
Mhm.
And the way that you approach things. Inclusion is really about the involvement and empowerment of people of different backgrounds, different dimensions of diversity, where everyone is truly appreciated and leveraged for their differences.
Yeah. I'm glad that you say that because there's definitely people get confused about that, and it's really important to define that. You also talk about, I'm sorry, but this wasn't here, but you also talk about equity and belonging. Can you talk about that a little bit, what that means and kind of how that's used as well?
Yeah, yeah. So oftentimes, in terms of equity, people confuse that with equality, where, you know, equality is where everyone is basically given the same thing. Equity is really about creating that level playing field because some people do start with less and may be disadvantaged. And it's really about bringing people up to the same level and to the same level playing field. And belonging is really about that environment where people really feel that they belong, that they are not outsiders, but rather that they really are included.
Yeah. And that's important because, I mean, with different groups, I'm assuming that, when you're an organization, you're, let's say in HR, your job is not just to kind of hire people, but it's to connect the people and build a culture, right? And
Absolutely.
you have to kind of create that belonging. And everyone comes from different backgrounds, right?
Right.
So I think
Right.
that might be difficult, especially when you're talking about like bigger organizations, right?
Yeah. And when people don't feel that they belong, they want to leave and they don't want to perform. So you're
No.
never going to get the most out of people if they don't feel that they belong.
Yeah. I think that that's really important, especially like in kind of in the onboarding and the hiring process, getting to understand who the person really is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what inspired you to devote your career to building this inclusive culture?
Well, so I would consider my story one of going from pain to purpose and ultimately promise. So it's all about the P's, Jasmine. So when
Right.
I talk about that journey from pain to purpose and promise, it's really about, well, where did it all start? A lot of it came from my personal pain. I have been the victim of hate crimes myself multiple times in my life.
Really?
And
Oh,
yes, and in addition to having been a victim of hate crimes, I also faced discrimination in the workplace and also often, sometimes didn't feel that I was included and therefore sometimes didn't feel that I belonged. And so those feelings and those personal experiences led to my purpose, which is to be a builder of inclusive culture and ultimately to focus on the promise. So those solutions that I felt should have always existed to really drive true diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging.
yeah. No, that's horrible. But you know what? I feel like the pains that you receive, as you're coming along in your professional life, they force you to do something. And a lot of people stay quiet and they don't do something. So really, I gotta say, I'm very proud of you, and I think it's very important to do that. Not a lot of people would embrace it and actually do something. You know.
Thank you. Yeah.
I,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because when people look at my resume, and I have had a lot of successes, but I think it's really important for us all to be very authentic and transparent about the challenges that we face because things aren't all hunky dory. And
no, they
I
aren't.
think that no, and and honestly, pain can be a really important fuel to driving needed change.
I don't think anything happens without it, really.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna give a peek into my next guest is a company that's doing something to raise the bar on disability in the entertainment industry and support women. And it's because
Great.
there's a lot of pain there, you know?
Absolutely.
You gotta, okay.
Absolutely.
So I don't want this to be too melancholy. I'm gonna keep moving forward.
Okay. Okay.
So what do many organizations, why do many organizations struggle to make real progress when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? Because I think I do see that. I mean, I've trained a lot of women and had a lot of female clients in the D&I space in these companies, and I'm an outsider, right? And I'm always looking in and seeing like, geez, why are these companies, I feel like a lot of the companies still struggle with it. It's like they have to put so much energy behind it because it
Mhm.
hasn't been totally embraced. So
Yeah.
what's the reason for
Yeah.
that?
Well, I think that when you think of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, it almost feels overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so many ways that you can attack it. There's so many issues that need to be tackled. But I think that why companies struggle is because they don't even know where to begin.
Mm,
And the way that I really strongly believe that we really need to attack it is by thinking about, well, so culture drives all of this: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. But what is culture? Culture is the sum of the individuals. So it is very, very critical, in fact, to start with individual behavior,
mm,
because how we as individuals behave, especially when it comes to inclusive behaviors, ultimately drives the organizational behavior. Because when people say, oh, the organization did this, the organization did that, who does it? It's individuals. So, how we as individuals ultimately think, act, and interact with respect to inclusion influences how the organization looks with respect to diversity and representation, how it acts in terms of promoting diversity and inclusion, and ultimately how it feels in terms of everyone's sense of belonging and equity. So if you can get the inclusive behaviors right, then everything else will be that much easier to impact in a positive way.
yeah. No, I agree. It always starts with either one individual can help or hurt, right? Isn't that true?
Yeah, and
And
we all have a role.
especially if they're in a leadership position, especially, I think I'm sorry, but I'm so adamant about that because it is about like the executive brand and what they do. Because,
Absolutely.
people they want to follow, and that's good, but they need
Yeah,
to go in the right direction.
right, exactly,
Yeah, what you
exactly.
said is very important for the leaders that are listening, the female executives that I talk to. Very important that they understand that they are,
Yeah,
whether they know it or not, they're making an impact, right?
yes, because they're role models.
Yeah.
People look up to leaders, right? And so you as a leader have a responsibility to really be inclusive as well,
Yeah.
and to drive that inclusion into what we call the 4Ds of leadership. It's about team dynamics, discussions, decisions, and development,
Mhm.
and making sure that you are truly inclusive in those respects and role model that positive behavior that
Mm,
your team members will follow.
mm. Okay, so what is it? So if you're a leader, what does it take to drive sustainable impact and change?
So, if you're a leader, it's really important to just take a step back. A lot of organizations they look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as almost a check the box type of
Yeah.
initiative.
Yeah.
Oh, if we do this one training on unconscious bias, we're good. But research actually shows that in order to really have that sustainable, lasting impact, right, it's about creating lasting behavioral change. And how do you create that? So, to create lasting behavioral change, only 20% of it comes from insight that one off workshops can offer. 80% of it actually comes from how do we live and breathe these behaviors in the day to day, reinforcing these behaviors, right, over time. So it's not just about the one off workshops, it's about really ensuring that we really are very mindful in the day to day in terms of how are we building that inclusive culture. And it's a lot of it is about focusing on consciously inclusive behaviors and really thinking about it from not a training perspective, because oftentimes this is people think, oh, training, oh, I'm getting the bad behavior beaten out of me. I don't want to have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
Right. But whereas if you're like, okay, this is about coaching and development in terms of how we can all be more consciously inclusive of each other.
Yeah.
That takes a different tenor, right? It's just,
Absolutely.
it's very,
Yeah.
and people are more pulled into it rather than pushed into it, right? And so, so it's a lot about just focusing on positive behaviors.
I like that. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, people think when, I understand. They might think, well, it's something that's might be forced down my throat. But if you can educate them on how it's actually uplifting and embracing, because I honestly like I like when you talk about belonging. I think that word needs to be brought more into this conversation about diversity and inclusion. When you talk about it that way, it makes a lot more sense, Betty, you know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as to why and the benefits around it.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
especially
Absolutely.
now, with we're in this time of, like, every second there's more layoffs every second. You know,
Oh,
it's horrible, honestly. So with
yeah.
all of that going on, there has to be something that can save us. And, if we can talk about, okay, let's stop for a second. Let's stop and figure out what's happening, what's broken, instead of the media just saying, oh, there's all, I don't know what I mean, throwing everything at us. Let's stop. Let's think about, how can we build better organizations? How can we work better together? What's missing? And it's not buzzwords. It's like looking behind the buzzwords. So I really like
Absolutely.
that belonging piece, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. Okay. See, I'm always learning on this podcast.
I think we all do. We all do.
No, it's great. What 2 to 3 resources on D&I education? Because I always ask my guests, because they're the experts on their subject matter. So, if you could mention like 2 to 3 resources specifically on D&I education, there's so much out there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of them, especially as we're talking about women, there's a great book called Pay Up by Reshma Saujani. So she is a CEO of Girls Who Code, and actually I had the pleasure of interviewing her. So that's one resource that I think is really very powerful. But I want to actually take a step back in terms of this question, because when we talk about, well, what's a great resource, it really depends on the lens and the perspective from which you're coming.
Yeah.
And what do I say that? It's because everyone is very different in terms of where they are in their journey within diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And I think it's really important to take a step back and actually assess where you are. And then from there, figure out what are the best resources for you. And so in terms of the assessment, two things that I really would recommend people consider doing. One is the TIQ assessment, which is the Think, Act, Interact Quotient assessment of individual inclusive behavior. So it's a way to measure how you and your team are behaving when it comes to conscious inclusion. And so you can see where those gaps are in terms of your own behavior and your team's behavior. And then the other thing is also Harvard has a series of implicit bias tests. So you go to implicit.harvard.edu, and really, I found it very enlightening in terms of really understanding all these implicit biases that I didn't even realize that I had. And so from there, once you realize, where there may be holes, then you can work on building, for example, your cultural competence with respect to different groups, and then also figure out how you can be more consciously inclusive. Once you figure out, for example, where you need to build your cultural competence, it's really about, first of all, I think the most powerful resource, diverse and inclusive relationships with different people, I would say, is the most powerful way to really drive change. Because when we, oftentimes people talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and it's so theoretical.
Yeah.
But once you can create that relatability and really drive it from here, the heart, that's when we can drive real change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and for those of you that are watching or will be watching this later, we Betty offered a free gift from her assessment. So for those of you that are interested that didn't RSVP today, feel free to shoot an email over to info@Warrior Women in Business. We'll be doing a follow-up as well. So, and thank you for offering that. So, okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Big question is, can you share an example from your work or just an organization that you respect on a company that has really embraced diversity and inclusion, and what has been the result?
Right. Yeah. Well, I just want to take a step back and say that there are a lot of organizations that are doing great work that just haven't received like visibility. Some organizations that have done great work that are more visible include organizations like Sodexo, where they have actually a majority of their workforce is women. Johnson and Johnson has been on the Working Mother, 100 best list for 28 years. Their CDO, their Chief Diversity Officer, reports directly into the CEO. Organizations like MasterCard really do a great job in terms of really, integrating their diversity and helping to drive innovation from that. EY does an outstanding job when it comes to diversity recruiting and promotion track records. A lot of different organizations. You and I chatted briefly before about Morgan Stanley. They have a fantastic multicultural accelerator program. I believe that's what it's called. But they really do great work when it comes to promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so there are a lot of great organizations that can't do enough justice. But it's really about and I have to say, in terms of the work that I've done, some of my clients, in terms of who really taken on TIQ and the inclusive behaviors, and really embraced how it's not about the one-off training, but it's about that reinforcement, right? We've seen measurable change in terms of not only how people start to see themselves and realize, wow, you know what? Maybe I wasn't quite as inclusive as I thought I was.
Yeah.
But once they become more mindful of their own behaviors, they behave more inclusively. And then the team starts to rate each other as being more inclusive. But it takes that greater mindfulness. So breaking things down into specific behaviors, right? So, for example, TIQ measures how you think, act, and interact along 8 key behavioral dimensions that really define what inclusive behaviors are. And so those include being open, aware, unbiased, performance and goal-oriented, curious, culturally competent, collaborative, and courageous. And even skills like empathy are in fact a combination of being open, aware, unbiased, curious, and culturally competent. So people are always buzzwords, but it's really about breaking things down into, more tactical, practical behaviors. And that's what actually starts to drive the change. So
Okay.
I'll pause there.
Well, I mean, you gave about a million examples, and also I like, I like that you detail the process as well, because people might not understand that what goes into it to drive that. And I know that these companies, it's not like a one and done, right? It's a continual effort and continual programs, and so that's 100% what it takes. They have to be so aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
and ensure that the demands from employees change, the cultures change, and they have to be on top of that. So, I mean, I do know about Johnson and Johnson. Actually, done a lot of work in the healthcare space, and yeah, some of the healthcare companies. I actually think a lot of the healthcare companies are the really good examples.
Yeah, I
I
have a number
honestly
of.
believe that I've always said I like working with healthcare clients because they intrinsically have empathy, and that's what I
Yes,
see. That's the
yes,
relationship
yes.
connection.
Yeah,
You
and
know
they're
what I
very
mean?
focused on wellness. So wellness,
Yeah,
and there's definitely a lot of overlap and interconnectedness between DEIB and wellness.
makes
Because
sense.
when you think about it, right, when people don't feel that they're included and they don't feel that they belong, that really weighs on people, and it really impacts their wellness, their well-being, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much interconnectedness. And so, but I agree with you. I have a number of healthcare clients, and yeah, I've had great experiences working with them, and there is, I feel a good level of commitment.
Yeah, that's a big part of what we do at Warrior Women in Business. In fact, through COVID, if you had, I don't know if you had a chance, but I interviewed a couple of women from the mayor's office and from the state on the whole suicide issue that was happening during COVID. So a big part of my mission here is not just to help women in business, but also to help them with their health and wellness, because we bear so many responsibilities. And I think we don't want to forget that, and we want to bring that into the organizations, like you said. So I think that's
Yeah.
a very important point. Okay, so I always ask my guests this question. I think it's really important. This is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, uh, is about when you personally have been involved in situations where you've either had to help and support other women through maybe a negative time, or maybe you've done that to grow a company amongst other women. It's really important that we kind of talk about that, so people can get to know who you really are,
Sure.
as a warrior woman in business. So is there a time you can think of where you were involved in helping, a woman or within a women's organization that you could share?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I was in my last corporate role, I was the co-chair of the Women's Employee Resource Group. And in that capacity, we really focused on our mission, which was really around recruiting, retaining, developing, and advancing women in the organization. And so in that leadership role, really managing those different work streams, right? And ensuring that we also communicated and had good relationships throughout the organization, including with the CEO,
Mm.
and ensuring that we really had traction in the work that we were doing. And so really focusing on building a lot of programs, mentoring programs. Even we did a fantasy football league.
Oh, it's
And
so
you
fun.
and it's really about bringing allies in too, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
And so ensuring that, um and I have to say this too about a lot of times within organizations and employee resource groups, that there is a very siloed type of view, right? And you're just like, oh, it's about women talking to women or Asians talking to Asians or whatever. But
Right.
really, it's not about that.
Mm.
Inclusion is a two-way street. In order for you to be included, you need to be inclusive. And so through the work, all of the work that I do
Mm.
and have done in my corporate role and now, it is about conscious inclusion, how we can all be inclusive of each other.
Mhm.
And so ensuring that those lines of communication, the collaboration, the cross collaboration. So that's one thing that I also was the founder of the Asian Leadership Initiative in my last corporate role. And so it's really about, cross collaborating. So in that role, I helped the Latinx ERG get
Oh,
started and share learnings and so
wow.
forth. And so it's really about empowering everyone to, be their best and to really excel and succeed.
Let me ask you a question, and I thank you for sharing that because formerly I've been the president of a couple of nonprofits, and I've run into situations personally where although you might herald that inclusion, you still get this I don't know, this kind of closed-minded rejection point from some people. So my question to you is, how do you how do you help to educate or support those that might reject the idea of inclusion, or just they just kind of sit there and say, no, 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 I am okay, or my group is okay. We don't necessarily need this because I know this happens. So I want to bring,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. So you can attack this from a few different levels, right? Some people, even though the business case has been clearly, stated and backed up, a lot of people don't really have a good understanding of the true business case for diversity and inclusion and really how it drives better performance at the end of the day. So you can use that approach at one level. But what I have found to be even more impactful is, as we had started to talk about before, it's really about attacking things from the heart, right? A lot of it is about that relatability, which comes from, you know, relating it to their lives. And so sometimes, if, for example, you may have a male executive who is not really um, bought in on promoting women or,
right.
whatnot. It's about, well, what about, like, think about how you would feel if this were your daughter or your wife or
Mm,
someone in, it's really about creating that
person.
relatability and making it personal.
Yeah.
But I have to say, storytelling is so incredibly powerful.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
can give statistics up the wazoo,
Yeah.
but
At the end of
but
the day, yeah, actually, right, because people don't really connect. Well, some people, accountants, I guess. I'm joking. Connect with numbers, right? But when you
yeah,
tell a story and it hits home, I think that's what that makes a lot of sense.
that I think that's very powerful. And then also this whole concept of what's in it for me,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yes.
Even like
Yes.
and that, yes, there's a business case, whatnot, but you know, and also, and as it relates to storytelling, sharing those experiences and reminding people to think about when, in what situations was diversity and inclusion actually very helpful to you in, getting you where you wanted to be or where you wanted to get to.
Right.
And even as an entrepreneur, I have to say that my diverse and inclusive relationships are what have gotten me where I am today. I would not have been able to achieve a third what I have achieved if it were not for my diverse and inclusive relationships that I've built over time. I am not a subject matter expert in everything,
Right. Yeah.
but because I have diverse and inclusive relationships, different the people that I can go to for different things,
Yes.
right?
You brought that
That
up.
that that is what actually all to really succeed, because we can't do everything on our own and we don't know everything, and it's important to know people with different perspectives and have different expertise, right, that can really
Yes.
help us all to achieve more.
Oh, absolutely. Especially as an entrepreneur. I talk about that all the time. I mean, diversity and inclusion goes beyond just the embracing it in an organization for employee development. From an entrepreneurial
Absolutely.
side, yeah, I mean, we all, that's what this is about, right? We need each other. We need to be open minded and embrace each other and for wherever we come from. Like, you never know how many millions of times have I been in women's networking groups, and I'm always like, oh, it's so interesting what that person does and where they came from. And you know, if I weren't here and I weren't listening, and that's the other big thing, I think the key is listening when it comes to diversity and inclusion, is actually listening, taking the time
Yeah,
to not think what's in it for me, but like, oh, let me, because at the end of the day, you'll receive something out of listening and embracing others, right? Which is like a,
absolutely.
it's interesting if you think almost the reverse of this kind of dog eat dog thing. So totally agree with you on that subject. Okay. All right. When you hear the term warrior women in business, like when I reached out to you and I said, hey, do you want to be in my podcast, Warrior Women in Business? What went through your mind?
Said, first of all, I love that
Oh,
name.
thank
Such
you.
a great brand. But it's really about warrior. Think of someone who really perseveres against all odds and for the benefit of not just themselves, but for others.
Yeah.
That this is a, much more than the individual. And it's about women bringing other women along as
Yeah.
well. And what are we doing for others, not just ourselves?
What are we doing for others, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're doing for others is going to support you anyway. It's like that community. I,
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, I mean, even I have this just quick story. So I've written a few books, as you know, and that's not a big deal. The point of this story is that one day I was coming home, I got off the subway, and this girl came running up to me, and she had my book, and she said, "You've changed my life." And I'm like, "What?" So she read my book and it helped her get a job because I do a lot of career development. And I just thought,
Mm,
hey, that's one person, but that's enough. And you know what I mean?
yes,
It's like you don't, my point is you
absolutely.
don't have to like think you need to affect 1 billion people. If you're affecting one person and that person affects another person in a positive way, it's
Yeah.
just amazing. When you see
Yeah.
that for yourself, right, Betty? When you see, hey, I did this little thing, it helped this person. Wow, that
Yeah.
that to me is enough.
Yeah.
It-
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. And you mentioned your book and getting that feedback. Similarly, I've gotten that feedback from the book that I wrote with my mother, Pulling Power, and which is about how do you propel yourself and others to success.
I love it. I can't wait to
And thank you, thank you.
yeah.
And we'll make sure we get you a signed copy.
Yes. Yes.
um, but yeah, it's people have said, "Wow, this has changed my life." And yeah, you don't, to your point, it's not necessarily about changing the entire world. It's one person at a time, right? And if you can impact one person, then it's a success.
I mean, I would say that would be a big takeaway from people that are listening, and this whole subject of diversity and more importantly inclusion and belonging, because I love what you're talking about there. Is like think about who it is around you that you maybe you can uplift or you can help. It could be something small, because that's what this
Yeah.
is about, because then it creates what you were talking about, the trickle effect in the organizations, right? I think that's really a good point. Okay. All right. So now your family. I'm not going to get really personal, but
Nah, it's all fine. I'm
uh,
an open book.
maybe over a drink. But as far as the work that you're doing with family is pretty amazing, honestly, Betty. I was like, wait, she's worked with her mom and her kids. That's really cool. So can you talk about how you got them involved and what they're doing and what that looks like for us?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, just turned 80. Uh, Actually, last year she's turning 81. And a few years ago, I received a Corporate Trailblazer Award for the impact that I've been making in diversity and inclusion and my overall career success. And when I had to write my acceptance speech, I thought long and hard about who I am and how I got to where I am. And all roads led back to my mom.
Yeah.
And I realized that every letter of her name, polling, represents an important principle for success, however you define it. And then, so I said to her, Mom, we really should write a book together. And at first she's like, I don't have time for this because she's still working full time,
Oh,
by the way.
I know. They're all busy. The older people have no time. I get it.
Yeah, yeah. So she's like, okay. But
Yeah.
then we wound up actually, I said, okay, we're gonna go on a cruise. And we wound up writing this dual perspective
Yeah.
autobiography and weaving in these principles for propelling yourself and others to success. So I wrote the book with my mom, and then I had two kids. And
Mhm.
so in the process of writing it, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a good mom. I'm going to be a good mom. And I'm going to explain to my kids the polling principles. And at the time, they were 7 and 9.
Okay.
And my daughter, who was 9 at the time, said, Mommy, I love the polling principles, but honestly, no kid is going to want to read your book. And at the time, I was hurt, offended, but then I thought about it and I was like, she's absolutely right. I have to think about the audience, right? And the way that I would speak to or teach these things to an adult is different from how you communicate these things to children. And so in this sense, it was diversity and inclusion within my own family, taking into account a different perspective and including that. And so being inclusive of that, because then my daughter said, but you know what, Mommy? Who doesn't love animal stories? And so from there, we wound up writing our best-selling and award-winning books and resources. And so Meet the Persevering Penguins and Pals, they actually collaborated with their cousin on. And so, the cousin, this is illustrated by a middle school child, right?
Wow.
Really like incredible work. But also, again, it's about diversity and inclusion,
Well, thank
right?
you for
Just
all about that. Yeah. I want to read. Can I read that book first? Because it's a lot easier.
yeah. Yeah, but it's sort
Oh,
of like
God.
thinking about even diversity and inclusion within your own family. It's not to your point. It's not just about diversity and inclusion is not just about organizations and business. It's about our day to day and everything that we do, right? And so, so we roped in my mother-in-law, and who's an artist as well, and so she's an educator as well. And during COVID, she was isolated on her own,
Yeah.
and so we were working on things, and she said, thank you for giving me purpose.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, yeah. Yep.
Right. And so it's like bringing it, like really being inclusive of people,
Mhm.
considering their talents, and how can you all work together to do something meaningful. And
Absolutely.
so that's what we've done, with our family. And so now in fact, there are 2 more books that we haven't published yet, but we're very focused on the A to Z of global citizenship. So every letter has a different behavior and a different animal associated with it.
Oh my God. You don't know, I'm the biggest animal person. Oh,
Oh,
the biggest. I want a farm and I just want to live around animals. So
aw.
I love, no, seriously, they're the best people. That's what I say. No, that's wonderful though. That's wonderful. I'm serious. That's really, really great, Betty. I mean, more families should do these types of things in terms of being inclusive, leveraging the talents, getting them involved. Something that's fun and positive.
Absolutely. That
Fun
can
and
help the
positive.
world.
I mean, I like
Yeah.
that you took your daughter's, advice. That's always smart.
Yes. 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 Yes.
So in the
Yeah.
P section in the library, they're just going to find all your books. Right? I love it. So speaking of P's, wow, that was a good segue. So I see, I love doing my podcast. I miss doing this. So, so speaking of P's, let's talk about sports. I'm a total sports
Yes.
person. But so let's talk about pickleball. I know that's a passion of yours.
Yes.
Throw in
Yes.
another P. Talk about how you're involved with pickleball, what that means to you, what that's all about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started playing pickleball about a year and a half ago. Before then, I sort of like heard murmurs about it. I was like, oh, what's this pickleball thing? So I started to play it, and pickleball, I've realized, is truly one of the most inclusive sports that's out there. People of all ages, sizes, and abilities play pickleball. They even have special rules for people who are in wheelchairs, for example. I've played with people who are single digit in age up to like mid 80s.
Wow.
and we have good games together. Um, and it's about teamwork. Pickleball is typically played in doubles,
Mhm.
and when you do open play, it's oftentimes about switching partners and asking the question, who haven't I played with? As
Mhm.
opposed to always playing with the same people. So it truly is
Wow.
about diversity and inclusion. It's about teamwork. How do we all learn to work with different people, collaborate to excel together?
Yeah.
And so I love playing pickleball. I play pickleball probably a good 4 times, maybe more, sometimes a week. Uh, and it's to me so important for my physical, mental, emotional, social well-being. It's a very social sport. And I've actually started to integrate it into my work. And so you can also call me Pickleball Betty. I'm also known as Pickleball Betty by
That's right, pickleball penny. Forgot.
other.
That's your nickname. I should have started with that.
Yeah, yeah, maybe. And then create something known as Pickleball Positive, which really is about the A to Z of how can we all play, work, and live well together. So, in fact, actually taking the same A to Z that my children and I have developed in terms of those behaviors that are critical to global citizenship.
Mhm.
And really now we've we are creating a video series, a whole A to Z video series,
Mhm.
taking micro lessons from pickleball and applying them to work and life and to diversity and inclusion specifically.
Yeah.
And so it's actually been a lot of fun, and I love how I can integrate my passion into true purpose and ultimately the promise, those solutions, right? That I feel will really make a difference because pickleball is so, it really is such an inclusive sport. And frankly, this is my first real sport ever in my life.
Really? Wow.
I used to like, run a little bit, I mean, 4+ times a week. This is my first serious
That's
sport
a
ever.
serious sport. Yeah. I understand. I'm a hockey player.
Yeah. And so, but as a sports, but as a hockey player, someone who's in sports, and team sports,
It's a team sport.
there's so many lessons
Oh,
that are applicable that
100%.
transcend from sports into work and life. And
100%.
I think that creating that relatability is so important when we talk about things such as diversity and inclusion. And when you talk about, the resistors,
Yeah. I
sometimes
was
like
kind of
bring
talking about hockey there. I was kind of talking about that world, it's and some worlds are still, I think, archaic, and I don't understand why, it's like in one setting everything is 2023, and then another setting it's like 1999, and it doesn't make any sense. So, but I think it's more than just when we're talking about today, we're talking about inclusion, belonging, and diversity, right? And it's more than just throwing the labels out there and, like you said, doing the training and the push mentality. I like that because
Yes,
that's marketing, right? It's more about making it like a cultural and community based thing that you almost
exactly.
don't even think about. And
Yes,
that's what I like about what you're talking about. Like, yeah, it's you don't even think about it. If you're in a sport like pickleball, where you're like, okay, well, I haven't played with this team, now I'm going to switch here. It's not like you're thinking about inclusion. You're just doing it,
yes,
and
yes,
I love that. You know?
yes, yes. And hopefully that will transcend. You'll take that from pickleball and apply it to work and life, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what you should do.
Yes.
That's what we all should do. Okay. All right. So I think one other question is the. I noticed there that you also amongst the millions of things that you do, because you're a warrior woman in business. You got your shirt on, right?
Yes, you do. Can I show it?
Yeah, show it.
Woo, do you see it?
So she's wearing the '60s
Woo!
throwback warrior woman with the samurai sword. We have a whole litany of. We just launched a whole new collection on warrior women in business, and this month we are going to be giving a percentage of proceeds to Ramped, who's my next guest, and that's they support women with disabilities in the music and entertainment industry, which is one of those archaic worlds that I'm trying to change right now.
Mm,
Betty, you should be
yeah.
talking to all those companies about, I'm not even kidding. Please go in.
Yeah.
They need your help.
All
But
right.
yes, so but I did notice another thing that you do, which is you run the talk to us about the Asian American Authors Book Club. What is that? What is that about?
Yes, yes. So I'm one of the co-founders of the Asian American Authors Book Club, and what we focus on is really elevating Asian American authors, their stories, and their work. And oftentimes, what we do is we will interview different authors, and I've had the honor of interviewing, for example, former chairperson and CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi, on her book My Life in Full. I've also interviewed Reshma Saujani on her book on
Wow.
Pay Up,
Oh yeah.
and you know, best-selling author Qian Julie Wang on her book Beautiful Country, as well as promoting up and coming authors, because it's really about how do we elevate each other. So,
Yes.
and that's what I'm really about. I really want to provide that platform and elevate others, because we all need to help each other.
Yes, we do. And I'm gonna probably ask you to be a speaker when I have my next conference because
All
I,
right.
yeah, there you go. It's not an ask, I'm telling you. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love
And
to have
then
you
the
on because it's, it's really about women that really have done things and want to help and, and it's not, I think you have to lead by example in life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That,
And also the other thing about the Asian American Authors Book Club, and especially in this, you know, in the past few years, there's been a huge, you know, increase in anti-Asian hate. It's really about getting our stories out there,
mm,
and then also challenging some of those biases and stereotypes that people may have about us. And so, and it's really creating that community, and really starting helping to address some of that anti-Asian hate as well.
that's wonderful. I have a big question that I'm just going to ask because it
Yes.
is on my mind, and I know we don't have much time left. And we're not going to take questions today, unfortunately, because we had a little bad seed error on Zoom today. So I'd rather not go there. If
Okay.
that's okay with you, Betty.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So my big question, I think people have been afraid to ask, but I'm not afraid to ask anything. It's so you talk about inclusion, you talk about belonging. I love it. Okay, and I love what you're doing at your Asian Authors Book Club as well. I think it's all very important. But what about the reverse? And I'm just going to throw this at you. So last night, I'm involved in many women in music organizations. I'm a musician. I do a lot here with Warrior Women in Business to support female musicians as well. I was asked if someone had a big story to tell on how they embrace and support female musicians, but they needed to be of color to be interviewed. So I wrote to the person. I said, well, I'm not of color, but I have a lot to share. So my question to you is, if you maybe aren't of that, race, ethnicity, but you have a lot to share in those type of circumstances, how do you approach those types of things? You know what I mean? It feels like if we want to be inclusive, we need to just be inclusive. With Warrior Women in Business, I don't care what you look like, where you came from.
Yeah.
I don't care
Yep.
what you
Yep.
do.
Yep. 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 Yep.
I don't care. I don't
Yes.
actually have had, and I am planning on having other men on the podcast that are involved in diversity and inclusion and supporting women.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
is like,
Yep. Yep.
so to me, this is a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I have something good I can bring to the table. So I'm just
It's
wondering what your thoughts are on that piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, as I mentioned before, I really am a strong proponent of how inclusion is a two-way street. And what you said, you know, in order to be included, you need to be inclusive. And so when you encounter a situation like that, it's kind of tactfully reminding people of that, right? But also, you know, maybe for that, you know, I'm not exactly sure, you know, the full situation there, but it could be that, you know, maybe there might be some other opportunity, right? And say, Like, hey, okay, so maybe I understand there may be some limitations, whatnot. This time around, yes, I do have a lot to offer. Is there another opportunity?
Yeah, well, that's what I
You
had
know, and
like a collaboration point.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah. Because, sometimes you have to also understand, like, optically, sometimes people have to have certain representation in order for them to, optically, you know, be perceived as being inclusive.
I understand that.
And and so it's, I think that just reinforcing that I may be I may not be a woman of color,
Yeah,
but here are all the other, my what we were talking about before,
yeah,
other dimensions of diversity that I bring to the table,
yeah.
perspectives that I can share that I think are very important to be included, and that you should be mindful of as well. I don't know, like, obviously I don't know everything that that person was thinking about, but just, helping them, educate them in terms of reminding them about, you know, diversity. What is diversity? It's not just the color of your skin.
Thank you. It's
It's
not just,
not your,
yeah,
gender or
yes.
whatever. There's so many dimensions of diversity. And I think that we all need to appreciate that.
We
We
do.
need to.
We all need to, because otherwise we get pigeonholed. And that's the
Absolutely.
reason I brought that question up. It's not anything, I'm not saying anything bad about that organization. In fact, I'm excited because I'm
Yeah.
always a person, this is why I guess I'm an entrepreneur, that tries to find an opportunity out of anything. If I feel
Mm,
like I can contribute. I'm like, well,
sure.
it's not a fit, but I know I can help, you know. So yes, I think that it's not just what we think it is. It's like you said, I love that you said it's much more than that. So those are all my questions. I just, first of all, I want to thank you, Betty, for being on. I guess if you would like to leave, this is a question, but if you would like to leave, how can obviously my audience get in touch with you? If you want to leave maybe just your website or your emails, if you just want to say something about how they could contact you and maybe where they could pick up your book would be nice as well.
Yeah, sure. So website is inspiringdiversity.com. And we recently launched our pickleballpositive.com website as well. You can see some sample videos that we have there. Also, my email address is betty@inspiringdiversity.com. Or if you wanted to just reach out to the broader team, it's info@inspiringdiversity.com. As far as our books, Polling Power and also Meet the Persevering Penguins and Pals, you can find that on Amazon.
Very good. Yes. Um, and also the book club.
Yes. So that's the Asian American Authors Book Club.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so just a couple things I want to say before I close out episode 37. First of all, this has been such a breath of fresh air. Again, Betty, thank you. So much information. I learned a lot today, and I earnestly think that your words need to be taken in by a lot of people. I think that this Women's History Month shouldn't, I always say it shouldn't just be a month, should be like they say Mother's Day, right? It should be all year round. We should be including others. Belonging is so important. And if you feel left out, I would also say, like, speak up. I feel like a lot of people might feel left out in situations and they don't raise their hand. I'm always the person that's like in the front row raising their hand. And I wish more people are like that, especially if they're not feeling included. I
Right.
think that will breed more positivity, right, in some of these organizations, especially if you're in a place like we are, where you're entrepreneurs and you need that community. So I think you should all take from what Betty said today, whether you're by yourself as a solo entrepreneur or you're a female executive at a major corporation, you can be a role model. So a couple of notes I wanted to state here. So first of all, our next episode will be March 15th, which is about 2 weeks from now, also at 12 noon, 9 a.m. Pacific for my friends on the West Coast. And I'm going to be interviewing the VP of Ramped, and Ramped is an organization that raises awareness, community building, and donations for those that are disabled in the music business industry. It's so important. I just can't emphasize it enough. But my guest will tell you all about it. And to that end, Warrior Women in Business, we launched our new entire lifestyle brand collection. It's more of a yoga, maybe pickleball, 30-year fun clothing line. Our plans is actually to do a couture line. There's a few designers we're talking to now next year, but right now we're doing that, and we're going to give a percentage of proceeds from any sales to Ramped. We really want to help people that are disabled. 70% of visually impaired women in the workplace can't find work. So these stats are just staggering. So if there's anything we can do, if there's anything you guys can do, please check out Warrior Women Business, the URL in the back, and there'll be more information on that. If you're interested in getting a replay of this podcast, which you should definitely bookmark this thing, just reach out to us. It'll be edited on all our social channels. And I probably will ask Betty to be either back on the podcast or, more importantly, live in person at our next event or conference. So with that being said, again, thank you, Betty, for everything. You've been a really wonderful guest, very educational and positive. And to kickstart Women's History Month, honestly, I couldn't have picked anyone better. So I really do appreciate your time. And I appreciate anyone that listened and watched today. And until next time, March 15th, we'll see you at Warrior Women Business.
Thank you.